Hello and welcome to another little Genshin discussion video thing. So today I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about the different archetypes and roles of characters in team comps, mostly in reference to all the terms and whatnot that I use in my Genshin optimization videos in the team comp sections of those. Just so that we're all on the same page and get an understanding. And there's also some confusion I've understood in the community regarding a few different types of roles and what exactly they refer to, as it's not always, the most plainly obvious, but there are a few that definitely are very pretty simple to understand. Just going over the main archetypes, there are three main roles and several subsections of those roles. Those main roles being main DPS, sub DPS, and support. So main DPS characters, pretty self-explanatory. It's the character that's out on the field the most often, dealing the majority of your damage. It's pretty plain, pretty simple, not too complicated, all there really is to it, but there are a couple subsections of main DPS, that mostly being AoE DPS and single target DPS. Now again, those are also pretty self-explanatory. AoE DPS is characters such as Tartaglia, who are dealing a ton of damage in a big AoE. They are going to shred through groups of enemies rather than dealing a ton of damage to one singular target, such as single target DPS. Single target DPS would definitely refer more to characters like Keqing and Hu Tao, who have a little bit of, they can do damage to multiple enemies, but their kit really is revolved around, let's do a very high amount of damage in this small little area that might hit one, maybe two enemies primarily, and that's what they excel at. Next up comes sub DPS. Again, pretty self-explanatory, but not always the most obvious. Sub DPS is essentially characters that are there to provide secondary supplemental damage to your main DPS, and they might provide some utility or an element that you might really need for reactions of your main DPS. But they are primarily there to fill in when your main DPS's damage and cooldowns are down, and to provide a nice amount of secondary damage. Obvious examples of good sub-DPS characters would be if you built Ganyu that way, Jingqiu's a good sub-DPS, Zhongling, Beidou can be a sub-DPS character as well. They're all characters that are going to provide a lot of secondary supplemental damage to your team, more so than your average support would, but not nearly as much as your main DPS might, while also often adding a little bit of utility or an element that synergizes really well with your main DPS. Now, between main DPS and sub-DPS, there's also another extra little category, and that is burst DPS. So burst DPSs aren't often going to be huge main DPS type characters, but they can still be main DPSs. But oftentimes you'll see them as sub DPS characters. So burst DPSs, a lot of people, there's more confusion around this than there is a lot of other things, simply because of the fact that it could mean a couple different things. Some people actually refer to it solely as burst DPS as characters whose damage comes from their burst. I don't refer to it in that regard. When I refer to burst DPS, I'm referring to characters who do a large amount of damage in a quick, short time span before all their cooldowns will then go on cooldown. So that wouldn't be characters like Tartaglia and Hu Tao. Sure, they have longer cooldowns in between their damage, but during that during the time of their damage, it's all sustained, continuous DPS. I would consider burst DPS characters to be something more like Ningguang, who is going to drop her Q and then a charged attack with the Star Jades, just to deal a lot of bursty damage in a very quick duration, and can have some sustained DPS after that, but the majority of their damage is coming from that quick duration. Before Yanfei came out, I thought she was going to be very similar to that, and she is very similar to Ningguang in that regard, but her ult just grants her Scarlet Seals fast enough to the point where she is still a very sustained DPS type character, but she can be run as a burst DPS in a more sub DPS type role. And that's where that kind of stuff starts to overlap, and you start seeing Ningguang is often run as a main DPS, and Yanfei is a good main DPS as well, but can also be a sub DPS, all within that burst DPS role. So next up is support, and now support has a lot of overlap with sub DPS oftentimes, because supports are mostly there to offer utility and elements that you want in your team, and sub DPSs can provide that to a degree as well, but they are also there to provide a lot of damage, while supports really are there to provide as much utility as possible, and that is the goal of a support in Genshin Impact when you're building your teams. So underneath support, there are 3 different types of supports that I often refer to, and that is utility supports, elemental supports, and flex supports. Now, I've kind of talked a little bit about each of these offhandedly here, but to go into a little bit more detail, utility supports are essentially all the characters that are going to provide different types of utility, such as Zhongli here with his shield, resistant shred CC, it's going to include healers and things like that, so like Jean, Bennett with his buffs as well. It's all the characters that are providing all these buffs and shields and heals and different utilities for your team. And utility supports are very encompassing, but not always, but don't encompass all supports, because not all supports are there to provide a ton of simple utility. And that's where we get into elemental supports. Elemental supports are pretty much there to provide the element that you want for your team to have the elemental reactions that you want for your main DPS. So Diona is a very common example of an elemental support who is there to provide her cryo application while also providing a lot of utility with her healing and her shield. Or if you have her at C6, her elemental mastery. Fischl as well is a common elemental support due to her consistent electro application. Jinqiu and Zhongling are both sub-DPS characters primarily in my book, but can also fill the elemental support role, and that's where you'll see where this gets the most complicated is how things overlap, because there is a lot of overlap between various different categories and archetypes here. And then the last support category, main support category that I refer to is the flex support. And now flex support is very unique, because when I refer to flex supports, I'm not often referring to the characters themselves. I'm often referring to the slot on your team. Flex supports are generally going to be, character-wise, flex supports are generally going to be the characters that are very flexible and fit into a lot of team comps. So your Zhongli's, your Bennett's, Diona, stuff like that. They're very good all-around characters that can be moved around to different teams as you need them. But at the same time, flex support, when I'm referring to the slot on the team, is when I am referring to a slot that is very open and can be mixed around depending on certain situations. So for example, when I'm going into the Spiral Abyss and I'm looking at what elements I'm going to need, I'll often pull in a core that fits with some of those elements, and then and I refer to cores in my Genshin optimization videos in those in the team comp sections, so you can refer to some of those if you want, and then there will be another 1 or 2 slots after that, and one of those will almost always be a flex spot that I can use to switch around characters depending on if I need different elements, or if I need a different type of utility. So maybe I don't need a healer if I can throw Zhongli in there, and oh man, yeah, he's got plenty of shielding power and safety, so I don't need that between his shield and crystallized reactions and yada yada. And that's really what flex support is all about. It's about being able to have that slot or that character that fits around and can be shifted situationally depending on what I'm going into. And so that is the main ideas behind the different character archetypes and roles when I'm building team comps. So when it comes to actually putting those together, my general philosophy is that I want to have one of each of these archetypes filled in my team. So I want a main DPS, a sub DPS, and I want a utility support, elemental support, and flex support. And again, some of that can overlap. So for example, when it comes to Tartaglia, I'll just go over Tartaglia. We've got a Tartaglia main DPS here, and now as far as sub DPS, a very common option would be someone like Zhongling right here, would be a fantastic sub DPS, and she can also fill the elemental support role because she's providing the pyro that I need for vaporized reactions that I want in that team comp. Then I'm still in need of utility supports and flex support. So in the last 2 roles, what can I do? Well, I can throw Bennett in there. He's another utility support, giving me a heal and a very nice buff, while also providing the pyro resonance. That's a lot of utility that he's providing, and he fits that very well. And then I've got one last slot. I've got everything covered except for flex. Wow, okay, now I've got one slot that I can mix around as I need, so I can throw in Zhongli if I'd rather have more safety and shielding and CC like that, or I can instead run Venti or Sucrose because I would rather have more in that flex slot. I might not want that safety as much as I would prefer more resistant shred of a particular element and more CC so that I can burst enemies more quickly, or something like that. And that's just an example of what I would do there. Or maybe I just want to throw in Albedo specifically to get a little bit of extra damage, but also more elemental mastery, something like that. That's the idea of the flex slot there, and the general ideas that I try and keep in mind when I'm actually putting these teams together. I think that it's really important to make sure that you're filling all those roles so that you can cover most of your bases in pretty much any team. And yeah, so hopefully that this video was interesting and helpful to those of you who have been struggling or who just generally want to learn more about building teams. I don't want to claim to be any kind of absolute expert in the field, but I've, playing the game for 6-7 months now, I've definitely picked up a thing or two, and I'm happy to share some of that with everybody. So thanks so much for watching the video all the way through. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see more videos like this. I think it'd be interesting to do a team building series on this channel. I think that'd be kind of fun. Let me know what kinds of topics you'd like me to talk about in that kind of a series in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe for that and other content coming in the future, and have a fantastic rest of your day.